Something breached our cosmic backyard recently, and the world has absolutely no idea it happened. An automated space alert fired inside the silent expanse of the Mojave Desert. While billions of people slept, worked, and scrolled through their phones, a profound shift occurred in the space directly above their heads. The night sky that humanity has studied for thousands of years changed permanently in a single hour, yet not one mainstream news outlet has carried the story. Most people hold a comforting assumption about the space around our planet. They believe our telescopes see everything, trusting that planetary defense networks would catch any genuine threat long before it became dangerous. We accept the quiet idea that our cosmic neighborhood is a predictable, well-monitored expanse of empty vacuum. That assumption died quietly, and the data that killed it is sitting right now inside classified research terminals that the public will never be allowed to access. Deep space tracking networks did not record a standard comet breaking apart under solar heat, nor did they log a random debris field scattering through the void in the chaotic way physics dictates. What they recorded was a deliberate, precisely calculated detachment event originating from an interstellar object designated as 3I Atlas. Something separated from that parent body while it was still millions of kilometers away from Earth. What emerged from its frozen core was not a chaotic plume of sublimating ice or a random spray of planetary dust, but a single, cohesive entity moving with extraordinary directional intent aimed specifically at our planet. That singular fact raises a question that institutional science is currently refusing to state out loud. If this object did not separate from its parent body through natural thermal forces, what mechanism actually initiated its departure? What caused something to detach, stabilize, and point itself directly at Earth from millions of kilometers out? The answer begins with the physical dimensions of the object itself, and those dimensions are where the real alarm starts. Advanced deep space sensors confirmed a highly specific structural profile when the detachment was first detected. The tracking arrays at the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California measured the object at 47 meters in length the moment it severed its connection with the parent body. It was moving at 340 meters per second, a velocity that should have sent it tumbling blindly into the infinite dark, scattering across space like any naturally ejected fragment. Instead, within an 8-hour window of its initial detection, it executed a flawless directional alignment. It did not drift or tumble. It corrected, stabilized, and locked onto a precise trajectory that ended at Earth's doorstep. 3 independent tracking stations on 3 separate continents verified every single coordinate. The Goldstone complex confirmed the real-time positional data, while the Canberra tracking station in Australia synchronized its orbital readings and arrived at identical numbers. Separate instruments in geographically distant locations, operating on independent systems, produced the exact same result. The object crossed deep space and entered the gravitational zone near our moon on a path so precise that multiple research teams immediately escalated the situation to emergency classification. The universe simply does not produce that kind of mathematical precision by accident. The deeper data layers sitting beneath those coordinates are about to show you exactly why the analysts who first reviewed them gathered in dark rooms well past midnight, realizing they were no longer looking at an ordinary comet. For 4 billion years of documented solar system history, space rocks have followed one reliable rule. They do what gravity and momentum tell them to do. They tumble, fragment under thermal stress, and scatter outward in chaotic trajectories shaped by the gravitational fields of whatever large body they pass closest to. In the entire cataloged record of human astronomical observation, spanning millions of tracked objects across centuries of sophisticated instruments, not a single naturally formed space fragment has ever executed the maneuver this object just completed. The statistical probability of a naturally ejected comet fragment settling into a perfectly balanced planetary orbital plane through random chance alone is, for all practical scientific purposes, 0. Researchers at the theoretical 3I Atlas tracking matrix ran the trajectory calculations repeatedly, desperately looking for an error in their own data, but there was no error. The object had achieved a mathematically precise orbital insertion around Earth. The exact kind of path that human space engineers design deliberately and spend months calculating before a spacecraft ever leaves the ground. A random chunk of ice and rock had apparently accomplished this in 8 hours from millions of kilometers away without any observable course correction. This absolute impossibility forced the situation into emergency briefing territory. Senior analysts across multiple international tracking agencies convened in the hours following confirmation. They were not discussing impact probabilities because the object posed zero collision risk. Its orbit was entirely stable. What forced those late-night emergency gatherings was the recognition that the data in front of them had no natural explanation, and the implications of the alternative were almost too large to process professionally. The historical record made the situation even harder to dismiss. The parent object, 3I Atlas, had been behaving strangely since the moment it was first detected in the outer solar system. Standard comets are predictable, developing visible gas tails as sublimating ice responds to increasing solar radiation, which allows astronomers to characterize their behavior months in advance. Over an 11-month high-priority observation window dedicated specifically to 3I Atlas, scientists logged 16 distinct anomaly events that defied every standard model in the astronomical classification system. The object exhibited sudden, unexplained shifts in rotational velocity that occurred without any detectable external gravitational influence. It produced electromagnetic emissions radiating from its inner core that repeatedly disrupted nearby satellite tracking equipment across multiple orbital zones. Individual researchers initially dismissed these data points as instrument errors, which is the rational first response when a single anomaly appears. However, 16 separate anomalies across 11 months of dedicated observation is not an instrument error. It is a pattern, and patterns have intentional sources. The pattern snapped into sharp focus when the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter processed a radar return that should not have existed. The returning signal was not faint or scattered like reflected radar from an irregular rocky surface. It was crisp, concentrated, and consistent with a dense, engineered, metallic structure. When orbital dynamics software traced that reflection back through space to its origin point, the coordinates aligned exactly with 3I Atlas. The structural alignment was within a fraction of a single degree. In the precise language of aerospace engineering, the trajectory from that parent body to the object's current orbital position matches a Hohmann transfer orbit. The specific, energy-efficient maneuver that human space agencies use deliberately to move artificial satellites between planetary bodies. The probability of a comet fragment accidentally executing a Hohmann transfer is not small or negligible. It is, by every standard of serious mathematical analysis, completely absurd. The tracking matrix eventually detected something that pushed the situation from deeply alarming into an entirely new category of concern. The object executed an active orbital correction. Its orbital period, the time required to complete one full loop around Earth, dropped from 15.1 hours down to exactly 14.3 hours. That reduction happened in just 65 minutes. To accomplish that specific adjustment from an altitude exceeding 300,000 kilometers above Earth's surface, the object had to change its velocity by 47 meters per second. At that altitude, there is no atmospheric drag, meaning nothing is slowing or accelerating objects through friction. The Moon's gravitational field cannot distort an orbit that dramatically in 65 minutes, as orbital mechanics simply do not work that fast at that distance. The kind of velocity change this object executed in just over an hour requires active propulsion. It requires a mechanism deliberately applying force in a specific direction for a calculated duration. Natural processes at that altitude and distance do not produce 47 meter per second course corrections in short time windows. This was not physics acting on the object. This was the object actively acting on its own physics. The response from observational platforms was immediate. The Hubble Space Telescope redirected its Wide-Field Camera 3 toward the anomaly's precise coordinates. The initial data stream showed the object rotating once every 4.2 seconds, a rapid spin consistent with a tumbling space fragment that had been subjected to a high-energy separation event. But within 45 minutes of that initial measurement, The spin rate slowed dramatically to once every 6.8 seconds. Something was actively removing angular momentum from a 47-meter structure in real time. The energy calculations that followed produced numbers that stopped the analysis teams cold. Slowing the rotation of an object that size at that rate requires the application of force equivalent to a 2-kiloton detonation of TNT. That is an enormous expenditure of directed energy. And yet, no fragmentation was detected, no debris field expanded outward, and no structural compromise showed up on any sensor array. The energy simply appeared to have been absorbed or redirected internally, leaving the object completely intact and newly stabilized in its corrected orbit. Natural explanations were tested and eliminated one after another. Standard cometary outgassing. The process of sublimating gas to create thrust produces velocity changes between 0.5 and 2 meters per second. This object separated from its parent body at 340 meters per second, which is 170 times faster than the upper limit of standard cometary activity. A subsurface explosion could theoretically produce that ejection velocity, but an explosion capable of generating that kind of force would shatter a 47-meter structure into millions of individual fragments drifting apart in all directions. Telescopes observed a single, completely intact entity maintaining total structural coherence throughout every phase of its transit. A micrometeorite impact was also considered and dismissed, as random impacts produce chaotic, unpredictable trajectory changes rather than mathematically ideal orbital insertions. The probability argument established in the initial trajectory analysis applied to every subsequent maneuver. Each additional precisely executed adjustment multiplied the improbability of a natural origin until the combined statistical weight made natural explanations functionally impossible to defend. The object was behaving like something that knew exactly where it wanted to be. The Goldstone Deep Space Antenna Array intercepted something that transformed the entire investigation in a single moment. The anomaly was no longer merely moving through space with suspicious precision. It was transmitting. A highly coherent radio emission breached the receivers, and every researcher monitoring the data feed understood immediately that the comfortable framework of natural explanations had collapsed permanently. The signal arrived at 2.3 gigahertz, a frequency band heavily utilized by advanced deep space military communication systems. But the frequency itself was not the primary alarm. What stopped the analysis teams was the overwhelming power and artificial structure of the transmission. At a distance of 340,000 kilometers, a natural rocky object produces only faint thermal noise, the electromagnetic equivalent of background static generated by surface temperature variations. This transmission measured nearly 500 times stronger than the background radiation of surrounding space. The bandwidth of the signal was equally impossible to explain naturally. It occupied a mere 1.8 hertz, an ultra-narrow slice of the electromagnetic spectrum that requires absolute electronic control and a stable, engineered transmitting architecture to produce. Natural thermal emissions always spread across broad frequency ranges because surface temperature variations are uneven and chaotic. Producing a signal this narrow requires deliberate hardware and a functional transmitter. Random space rocks simply do not carry transmission equipment. Analysts monitoring the signal detected a repeating cycle almost immediately. The transmission would activate for exactly 8 seconds, fall completely silent for 17 seconds, and then activate again. This total cycle of 8 seconds on and 17 seconds off repeated without variation across hours of observation. Dr. Maria Castellanos at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory documented the absolute temporal precision of the cycling pattern, while Dr. Thomas Way from the MIT Haystack Observatory stated formally that these transmission characteristics were entirely inconsistent with any known natural body or naturally occurring electromagnetic phenomenon. Minutes after the signal was first confirmed by Goldstone, the James Webb Space Telescope executed an emergency priority override of its standard observation schedule, locking its near-infrared camera onto the precise coordinates of the anomaly. The imagery it returned removed any remaining scientific ambiguity about what was orbiting Earth. The structure was perfectly cylindrical, measuring 47 meters in length and 12 meters in width. Its surface displayed intricate repeating panel arrangements, distinct structural seams, and sharp variations in surface reflectivity that indicated the integration of multiple advanced materials across its exterior. The structural layout exhibited a flawless six-fold symmetry, a visually organized, deliberate architecture captured at high resolution. This was not an irregular tumbling fragment with a coincidentally interesting shape. This was a manufactured object. Spectroscopic analysis of the surface materials delivered the final confirmation that researchers had simultaneously been working toward and dreading. The outer skin of the structure contained clear chemical signatures of processed metallic oxides, complex, refined materials that require extremely high temperatures and precisely controlled manufacturing environments to produce. These compounds do not form through natural cosmic processes. They are built. Something constructed this object, and that something understood material science at a level that placed the construction of this cylinder firmly outside the category of anything human civilization has ever launched into space. Within 45 minutes of the Webb telescope's confirmation arriving at research terminals, NASA activated a highly restrictive defensive response protocol. The speed of that institutional reaction was itself deeply telling. The Planetary Defense Coordination Office, the agency specifically designed to monitor and respond to impact threats from space, intervened immediately. Yet, the object it was responding to had a calculated collision probability of exactly 0. Its orbit was entirely stable, destined to keep circling Earth at 14.3-hour intervals without ever coming closer to the surface. The office was not mobilizing because something was about to hit us. It was mobilizing because of what the object demonstrably was. An internal directive bypassed standard civilian research channels and reached the United States Space Force directly. International tracking agencies across multiple allied nations were placed on an unprecedented high alert status simultaneously. Civilian researchers who had been monitoring the anomaly through standard scientific channels found themselves suddenly operating inside a security structure that was not designed for academic transparency. The rapid escalation from scientific curiosity to military classification happened faster than anyone in the civilian research community had ever experienced. The panic, as every senior analyst on the project understood, was not about a physical threat in the conventional sense. The orbit was stable, and there was no incoming impact. What generated the aggressive institutional response was the accumulated weight of every data point gathered since the object first appeared. The ejection from a parent body millions of kilometers away, the precise orbital insertion in 8 hours, the velocity correction at an altitude where natural forces cannot produce such changes, the spin deceleration requiring immense energy with 0 structural damage, and the narrowband radio transmission cycling on a perfect clock. Evaluated together, these data points formed a profile that every major observation platform on Earth had now identified as a manufactured structure navigating our immediate orbital neighborhood with clear operational intent. 3 possibilities remained after natural explanations were systematically eliminated. Human science had encountered an unknown cosmic phenomenon that perfectly mimics engineered technology. Global defense networks had catastrophically failed to track a massive domestic spacecraft from an unacknowledged program. Or this object was intentionally deployed from the interstellar void, separating from 3I Atlas to insert itself into Earth's orbit as the opening phase of something much larger. None of those 3 possibilities offered any comfort. The first meant our physical understanding of the universe contains a gap so profound that everything built upon it requires re-examination. The second implied that a secret space program of extraordinary capability operates entirely outside public knowledge. The third, the possibility that an interstellar vehicle deliberately dispatched and probe into orbit around Earth carries implications that shatter the established framework of human history. The baseline assumption that our civilization developed in cosmic isolation has been permanently invalidated. In the strictest sense, the data that invalidated it is sitting in research terminals right now, time-stamped and verified across 3 continents, waiting for an authority to decide what the public is allowed to know. The engineered cylinder orbiting silently between Earth and the Moon is not the end of this story. It is merely the beginning, because 3I Atlas is still approaching. In a short time, the interstellar parent body 3I Atlas will reach perihelion, its closest point to the Sun. Intense solar radiation will heat its frozen core to temperatures that drive violent outgassing events, raising internal pressures dramatically as sublimating material seeks escape routes through any structural weakness available. For a standard comet, perihelion is the most visually spectacular phase of its journey, the moment it develops its longest tail and puts on a brilliant display for ground-based observers. But for 3I Atlas, perihelion is what senior analysts dread most. The 16 historical anomalies recorded during its approach, combined with the deliberate deployment of a precisely engineered cylinder, have forced a complete reframing of what this parent body actually is. If the cylinder was merely the first object deployed from 3I Atlas during its approach, the question of what else might be resting inside its frozen core becomes the most urgent inquiry in human history. The historical anomalies no longer look like random data irregularities. They resemble a systematic preparation sequence. If perihelion-driven outgassing breaks open a comet that has been functioning as an interstellar deployment vehicle, the number of additional objects that could emerge is completely unknown. The data does not allow for a confident upper bound, meaning the cylinder in Earth orbit may be one of dozens or one of thousands. Every 14.3 hours, the engineered structure completes another methodical pass across Earth's orbital neighborhood. Deep space arrays continue to log the transmission cycle, 8 seconds active, 17 seconds silent, repeating without deviation through every observational window. Human civilization currently occupies an unprecedented position relative to this situation. We can see the object, measure its transmissions, and calculate its orbit with extreme precision, yet we cannot decode the signal. We cannot intercept the cylinder without capabilities that no acknowledged space program possesses, nor can we alter the approach trajectory of the parent body. We are, in the most literal operational sense, passive observers of a process that appears to be unfolding entirely on its own schedule. What the transmission cycle is communicating and to whom remains completely unknown. Whether the signal is directed outward back toward a point of origin in the void, inward toward Earth's surface, or simply cycling through an autonomous operational protocol cannot be determined from the available data. What can be determined is that the technology required to produce a narrowband transmission from a 47-meter structure at 340,000 kilometers represents a capability gap that human engineering cannot bridge anytime soon. The cosmic silence we currently inhabit is not empty. It is dense with data being collected by every available instrument on Earth as the tracking matrix remains fully active and the parent body continues its final approach. If the cylinder in orbit is a scout, an advanced unit, or the first of many deployments, the next transmission it sends may be a signal back to 3I Atlas, confirming that the survey is complete and conditions are met. If this account has changed how you look at the night sky, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications right now. Because when perihelion arrives, the next data stream will either answer the ultimate question or reveal a reality even harder to comprehend.